All right. Second scenario from the Tannenberg game. Now, the Battle of Tannenberg is famous enough that even I kind of know a little bit about it. But this one, there we go. I have a cat toy, but no cat. I throw it around and chase it. This one, the Second Masurian Lakes Battle, 1915 winter. I know nothing about it. I don't know a whole lot about the East Front World War I battles in particular. I'm usually not too interested in operational level things, which the battles of World War I, really the 20th century, all are. So, I haven't much knowledge of any of them, and in this particular one I have none. So this is a lightning broad front attack. The Germans hurl the Russians from Prussia, crossing the border despite winter conditions. Now, I thought at one point that I hadn't played this. No, I think I had. I think when I first got the game, I broke this out and tried it. And I think I struggled in part because of the setup. It was just so painful to set it up. And it's one of the things that kept me away from this game was, one side of it requires these little hidden grouping markers and for the big scenario, and the other scenario that's good for solitaire play, I have to go through this very painful process, and I've gotten a little better. I stacked all the pieces beforehand and then went back and followed here, of trying to read off the map sideways so that I can set it up. What's special about this one? Well, let's kick through the special rules. First of all, the Germans are going to go first. For winter, we're going to drop movement allowance by 1 for all things, but rivers and lakes are all frozen over and present no hazard or no difficulty whatsoever. A whole bunch of rules, some of which don't exist in the rulebook, are removed from play. Speaking of little errors, I found a cool one that I didn't even think was possible. Zipping down here, what is this? 1407, 1408, 1309, 1410, 1411. I thought these hex maps were sort of automatically generated. It's very obvious that someone actually had to set the facing on these, because otherwise every SPI game would have that, and I've never noticed it on anything else. It's kind of cute to see that the numbering had to have been done automatically somehow. I'm not sure how they would have done it automatically, but I kind of thought they had a template that they used for all the maps and then put the terrain as an overlay on it. Okay. All the Russian units are going to be in supply and command control during turn 1. We're not using the whole map. We're going to use the X18 row is the west edge. Well, that doesn't make sense. That's this row, and what they mean there is that it's the east edge. There's a number of typos. Some of the units don't exist in the game, but it doesn't really matter. There are plenty of units of the correct strength. Okay, and the 20XX hex row will be our south edge, and unfortunately that includes this unit, I guess, but that's basically across here. Units that are surrounded from game turn 2 on are worth double if they're destroyed. But to me that means whole units. We'll see what the victory conditions are, because they may be different, but it looks like step losses. And all German units have their movement allowance reduced by an additional 1 on turn 1. Okay. We see here we got step loss Souvlaki. That sounds yummy, but I don't know where it is. There it is. You know what we should do? We'll put little markers on things. Augustovo. So if the Germans get these are worth points. And this is another thing that I'm sure stopped me. Olita. That's up here. Grodno. No garrison there this time. If the Russian headquarters unit is destroyed or loses a step, it's worth 10. Each German step loss is worth 6. Each German headquarters step or loss is worth 20. Every stacking point of Russians in Germany at the end of the scenario is worth 6. Yeah, but how long is this scenario? Game turn 1 to game turn 6. So we're going to have a much shorter game here. I'm going to use a railroad to mark where the end of the game is. All right, so we got about a half a game of the other one in both size of the temporal and temporally. Bunch of things not here. Among the things that aren't here, grouping aren't here, railroads aren't here. Reinforcement rules are gone, although the Germans do have reinforcements somehow. I think that's a little bit of errata, but no biggie there, right? Overall, it looks like it's playable. It looks like the Germans have a tremendous advantage in force facing the Russians. I've looked at, as I put down the troops, remember the tactical quality advantages, etc. I think the Germans are going to be able to make some good moves here against the Russians. One thing that worries me, I look at, the density here. I get the feeling this is intended to be almost a trench warfare type situation. Now, there were entrenchments on the East Front at this point, but they weren't terribly heavy, and it begins to lead me to wonder, you've got entrenchments all the way at the beginning, actually, it begins to ask the question, gee, for the rest of this set, how do they handle the trenches? Maybe they're just printed on the map. Maybe these are considered too rudimentary to really worry about. The surprise attack in the winter was enough to push through. Yeah, there are certainly trenches by the winter of 15, if this is winter. It could be February, though. February of 15. Yeah, that's... there's not going to be much in the way of trenches at that point. A little bit. Okay. So that's where we're going, and we'll see what we get. Pretty sure this isn't going to go well. I got a very early start today. Not sleeping as much as I used to, and well, that could be a good thing for some people. It makes me feel kind of tired all the time. But if I haven't been sleeping, maybe I'll play as many games as Marco gets to. I doubt that. Just he plays a lot of smaller stuff. Anyway, what's not going to go well here is this kind of continuous front. I saw how I played it. I just pushed all my Germans forward, and now I'm looking at them saying, damn, I don't have good attacks set up anywhere. At least I'm in supply with this unit. And I've got a lot of supply available to me because even as I advance, the Russian, I guess I can draw supply off the German railways that the Russians are sitting on, and I'm not so sure the Russians cannot, I guess. I don't know. They don't have to worry about it for the first turn, but they're going to pull back, I guess. But I threw a lot of force against here because that's how I was set up to do, and maybe I could have shifted some of that and broken this kind of weaker space here. There's an advantage if I win in the flank and I'm able to kind of turn that, but other than that, I'm not so sure. And then over here, it's much less concentration of the Germans. We'll see how I punch through and what attacks I choose to make. I'm not going to video all that kind of decision making. I actually really dislike making that kind of decision because it's all just counting the odds and comparing. And in a game where you have so much freedom, so your standard SPI model or Avalon Hill or whatever is all of these would have to attack each other. Well, all these German units would have to attack all the Russian units, and I could, balance to get the odds. But here I have a lot more choices because I don't have to make any of these attacks. I also have the additional issue of I have to make sure everything is in command control when it attacks. That shouldn't be too hard. I think I've got, some pretty good numbers here, like 45 for Hindenburg that he can putting command control within a range of 8. So I'm not too worried about that, and I'm not going to bother counting. But you can see where the system could bog down under those kind of circumstances. And the German initial attack, with the Russians retreating their cav where they could, here and here, although they ended up losing some, mainly because that stuff's so weak, having it on the line doesn't even help the defenses really at all, especially with German units that can infiltrate kind of. We can see that whole right flank of the Russian army is pretty much disintegrated. But over here, I just made one attack, and elsewhere in the center, none. There might be some room for a few counterattacks by the Russians. Here's what we lost. Let's see. This guy took a hit over here. And I lost a bunch of steps over here. I've got the 4 already there, but 2, 4, 5, that's 20 more points. This is going to be a game where all the points kind of run in the negative because the Germans have such an advantage. They're going to have to get down to negative 35 to win. Now they're most of the way there. So I guess a Russian counterattack may be necessary. We'll try to see what they can pull. This is also a game where locations are just worth points at the end of the scenario, as opposed to the collection of points for sitting inside territory like in the Tannenberg scenario. The Russians have a really hard time in this. Not a lot of strength at all. And because of the reduced movement rates, and they're trying to run away, it feels, as well as make attacks, it feels really hard with their kind of more disparate forces to put themselves into positions where they can make attacks. I'm actually making some of these little 2-to-1 attacks with Russian cav against the German cav, if I can. See if the Germans get out of there. Yeah. Simply because the Russians, you know, at a 2-to-1, the Russians have a chance of maybe hurting the Germans. I don't know. I was probably a dumb attack because the most I could have done to the defender is really a 2, which he can retreat from, and I could take damage from it. But he retreated anyway, which is the net effect I wanted from it, and has no effect because he can just slide back in, basically. So we'll just leave that alone there. But the real problem here was trying to form something that can serve as some sort of defense. Kovno, for one reason or another, is totally valueless. Probably a typo. But this whole area has just been so weakened, and there's so many Germans there, and there's no quick movement with rail or anything. I think this whole Russian force is in danger of getting surrounded. We'll see how it develops, but the German units are a little faster, and there's basically no terrain for the Germans, but there is for the Russians with the forests and such now. Russian counterattacks, mixed results, and attacking in this game is so bad if you don't want territory, which is why in the base game, my initial impression when I first played it was the Germans don't want to attack. Well, you can surround the enemy and get an attack. The Russians wanted to attack in that because they want to push for territory, and the Germans have a reason not to give them territory. Well, in this one, the Russians don't really want to attack. I made 2 attacks, traded a step in each direction. The Germans lost a step and retreated. The Russians got very lucky with a 3 result over on this table. They could have also gotten an E. Once you get to that table, it might be worth rolling because you've got a 50-50 chance of doing damage without paying. But over here, the Russians attacked at somewhat lower odds and took a step loss to cause the Germans to retreat. Now that slows the Germans down a little bit, but it's not worth it. Anyway, the net effect on the victory points is negative 22, and we push into turn 2. Here we begin to see the German assault really beginning. Attacks on the supply back here now. Got some weak units, but that's going to hold up. Ooh, I forgot to move Hindenburg up. I should probably shift him somewhere. He's okay where he is. He's got him in range. This guy can help those. Okay. And then another little attack over here against this weakened unit that attacked. It's hard to really get a grip on the Russian units. For example, this guy, he's going to get away. This guy's trapped, though. He's not going to be able, I'm not going to be able to attack him. He's going to try to slip away, and he'll probably become a cornerstone of what the Russians have to do, because they'll be moving here 2, 3, and that's as far as they can get. So that'll be kind of keeping my defense closer to where I currently am than perhaps I'd like to be. Losses derived don't go well for the Germans. For example, they managed to destroy the unit here, but I'm sorry, I took too many steps from them. I took 5 step losses, which is what the unit had. They only took a 1 result, so they should have only taken 3. So I should get 2 steps back. That's 12 more points. Okay, and I'll put the extra steps back in play, which will be this guy down here. Another division. So that wasn't too terrible. They also only pushed this back and took losses. Not a good result for them. So you can see, you know, it's kind of tough to get your hands on the enemy and really wreck them. But wiping the army out has a payoff, which is all the, not the fortresses obviously, but a couple of these free hexes that you can take. And there aren't a lot of Russians left. The Russians pull into a defensive positioning. You can see just how tiny they are now. There's a lot more German units, and this should be pretty much a cakewalk, really. There's units exposed, these supply units. They serve little purpose except as victory points for the Germans. I'm using the cav to try to slow the approach so that those can't be grabbed easily. But there's almost nothing. There's 3 stacks here. 3 stacks that are at all real. And that's all the Germans really have to worry about. And I don't think they have to worry too much about a counterattack, a successful counterattack. Germans circle in, but they're outrunning their supply, so they got to be kind of careful here. They can still supply through this rail hex, even though that was initially Russian. So they're okay right now, but they can't really get the grip they need on this unit, and they can't really push around the way they want to. But, you know, the Russians are getting shoved away. There's plenty of time left in the scenario over there. I don't see this being too much of a... So the Russians lose another corps, and the Germans lose another division on kind of an ill-timed attack over, or ill-fated attack over here. I'll push forward because the Russians advanced there, or the Russians retreated there. Russian cav got pushed out of the way. This cav actually served a kind of nice thing by sitting there and not trying to retreat. I succeeded in making the roll to retreat and then decided against it because it was protecting the unit that was here and is dead from being surrounded. Now, it turned out they got an eliminated result against them, so it didn't really matter there. Now we're on the Russian side here, and time to extricate again and pull back. There's not much for the Russians to do in this scenario. They're just constantly in the retreat. And the Germans swarm in as the Russians have fallen back. Lots of attacks are going to be taking place. We'll see what happens. There's a real danger again to retreating the cav in that they're protecting the retreat routes. So I kind of have to sacrifice. Okay, so the German attack took 2 of the towns, managed to essentially push the Russians into a surrounded position with their major stack. Remember, if you're completely surrounded, if you're unable to trace out of a little pocket, your point value of your losses is doubled because you're considered to have entirely surrendered instead of just being shattered. So almost the entire Russian army has been wiped out here, including their headquarters unit, which they could have actually slipped away earlier. They left it in a... It's hard to tell if it's more exposed. Somewhere else, it could have been easier to kill. This is what the Russians have left. They have left 4 or 5 defensive strength points and no attack strength points. I'm going to call this here. there's no point in fighting this one out anymore. We're at negative 99 points. Negative 92 is a German decisive victory. There's nothing to get in their way. There's just steps to get hunted down. And then these assaults on the fortresses, which could generate some net points for the Russians, conceivably, I guess, depending on how much, how badly the Germans roll. But chances are the Germans are going to take them with only minimal losses. At most, say, 2 steps each. There's enough time to take them all. There's just no point to this anymore. The Russian army has been destroyed here. And I think this is a rough scenario for the Russians. I think it's more of an exercise in how do you handle the forces, just to see how they work, maybe as an intro to the system. Give you some ideas of how the different parts interact before you play Tannenberg. But it's also kind of a preview maybe into the later battles in the series to give you kind of an idea of what's going to be involved in them. And I noticed a few things specifically about this one that worry me. I'll try to catch them in my review, but one has to do with a lot more factor counting because of the kind of continuous line aspect of it. Tannenberg had a lot more, was more little scattered pockets of battles than this tended to be. This, at least at the very beginning, but even throughout, tended to be really crushing a line, crushing a salient. And I feel like the World War I, most of the World War I games are probably going to feel more like that in the series. And there were some very, very irritating factors in terms of how much counting you had to do in it. All right, up this.